Hello everybody, I hope you're having a fantastic day as always. Before we get into it, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone for the love and support on the last video. It really meant a lot to me and it was great to see, so really appreciate you guys for that. So in the last video we spoke about blueprints, and in that video I mentioned that there were ways to go about upgrading your gear without wasting all your fragments. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be briefly touching on blueprints once again, and then we'll be moving on to workbenches, calibration, mods, and the different types of ammo within Once Human. So without further ado, once again, my name's Casper, and this is my guide to upgrading gear in Once Human, for dummies. So to kick things off, we're briefly going to touch on blueprints again. As discussed in the last video, you can actually use blueprint fragments to upgrade blueprints, which permanently increases the stats of that item. If we right click on this assault rifle here and we hit T, we can actually see that this is a level 2 blueprint and does more damage. Not only is this one of the main ways to upgrade gear in Once Human, but it also carries over to different seasons. So anything you invest here will go with you over to the next 6-week cycle. However, there are only a limited amount of fragments obtainable per season unless you have Starcrum falling from the sky. And this is where workbenches come into it. If we hit B and we bring up the building menu, you'll actually be able to see 3 different types of gear benches. Now some of you newer players are probably looking at these materials thinking, oh my god, where do I get them? Don't worry about it, you'll get them when you go into future regions. As long as you're following the main questline, you'll find that you'll come across these materials in no time. But if you're the type of person that can't wait and you'd like to go ahead and get the best gear bench now, if you come to your map and you look for strongholds, you'll actually be able to see that they have what resources they hold. Here you can see the resources for a level 3 bench. If you come down here, you'll be able to see the resources for a level 2 bench. And coming back down here, you'll be able to see the resources for a level 1 bench. You'll see as well that all these regions have level recommendations. Speaking from experience, you can clear these areas on much lower levels than what they recommend, provided that you have the gear for it, which is exactly why you're probably watching this video.
Well, duh.
If you follow this guide, you should have absolutely no trouble going into the higher level areas with lower level gear. Now, as well as these materials, you'll also need to collect the metals. For the first bench, you'll need copper. For the second bench, you'll need steel. And for the third bench, you'll need tungsten. Exactly like the materials, they progress as you go through the regions. Only difference being these spawn randomly in the world and not in strongholds. Now, in case you've never played any survival game ever, you'll need to throw your metals in a furnace. I highly recommend going for the electrical furnace as soon as you can because it doesn't require coal to cook metals, which can be a massive crutch for progression in early game. Now if we hit F to bring up the furnace interface, here we'll be able to start cooking the different metals. Now that we have everything needed, we can go back into our build menu and we can start throwing the benches down. Now that we've got them down, other than having a flashy new look for each level of bench, if we head on over to them, you'll see on the right here that we have 5 different tiers. Each level of bench allows you to go higher. And as you'd expect, with every single tier comes an increase of the stats. But unfortunately, with this also comes an increased cost of resources. Much like the workbenches, as you progress through the different tiers of gear, they will require materials from different regions. So even if you're a level 10 player and you somehow manage to sneak into a level 50 region, to get enough materials to make a bench, don't forget you'll also need the materials to craft the better gear. Alright, so now that you know how to craft better gear, it's time to learn how to upgrade that gear. This is where another section of the workbench comes in handy. This is what we call the calibration tab. Now while this might look really complex to someone who doesn't understand what they're doing, it's actually really simple, and I'll break it down for you.
Let me break it down for you, Mark.
Now you'll see at the top here how it has a number out of 10. This is only the case for tier 5 weapons. Taking a step back to the tier system quickly, I've actually gone ahead and crafted weapons of the last 4 tiers to show you guys. As you can see here, tier 1 and tier 2 weapons allow you to have 4 calibrations, tier 3 and tier 4 weapons allow you to have up to 7 calibrations, and tier 5 weapons allow you to have up to 10. But Casper, what does this actually mean? To be honest, I have no idea, but I'm going to do my best to try and explain it to you.
What?
When calibrating a weapon, as you'll see here, every single time that you calibrate it, it increases the stats of that weapon. But this is actually only one part of calibrating gear. Notice here how we have something called calibration attributes. On this particular weapon, it increases the range by 12 and the accuracy by 6. You'll notice next to that it has a lock with a 4 on it. This means that that attribute is actually locked until this weapon reaches calibration level 4. So if we go ahead and do that, you'll see that it's unlocked. And below that, you'll notice it says insufficient calibration level limit. Now these two are actually for weapon calibration level 7 and 10. If I go to a tier 3 weapon and waste even more of my resources, you'll see now that on this tier 3 bow, that's level 6 calibration, we have the level 4, and if we go ahead and upgrade this, we now have the level 7 calibration as well. Unfortunately, I don't have the materials to demonstrate this with the level 10 calibration, but I think you guys get the picture by now. But before we move on from calibration, there's one more thing I need to show you. If you see this big blue button here that says replace calibration attributes, if you click on it, it'll bring up a little menu here. Now we actually currently don't have any, but I'll show you how to go about getting them. As you progress through the game, occasionally from loot crates or bosses, you'll get gear drops. And on an even rarer occasion, this gear may have calibration blueprints. If we go to the disassembly bench, these are distinguishable by these little blue things at the top right here. Now if we go ahead and click on one of these, we'll actually see that it will give us a calibration blueprint for that specific gear. I collected these purely for the purpose of the video, so I'm going to go ahead and disassemble these. If you have a ton of weapons and armor banked up, you can actually go down here to click on this little box, which will only disassemble the ones with calibration blueprints. Now that we have them, if we go ahead and hover over a calibration blueprint, we can actually see the new attributes. As you go through the game, you'll collect a number of these. I recommend not using the first one you get because chances are you'll get a better one down the track. If we go ahead here and grab one for an assault rifle, we'll head over to the workbench. Now if we click this big blue box again, we'll see that the blueprint is on the right here. Hovering over the blueprint will allow you to compare the attributes currently on your weapon and the attributes of the blueprint. If I now click to add it, it will bring it over to the left here, and if I was to hit use, which I'm not going to because I don't like these attributes, then it would replace all these attributes, and then if we went back to here, they would all be here instead. This is really useful for players who might have a specific build in mind, but the attributes of the weapon they're using don't quite fit. Now that you're all completely and utterly confused, it's time to make it even worse. Here we can see the mods menu. Along the top here, you can go and sort these by the different build types. And if we go over to the armor tab here, you can sort them between the pieces. Mods in Once Human can be added onto weapons or armor, and they have a singular core effect, which is extremely useful, and they have between 1 to 4 additional attributes which increase the stats of that gear and your character. Going over to my assault rifle now, you can see the mod that I have equipped here. Also notice on the right hand side, you can see the additional attributes added by the mod. Much like how the attributes of the calibration require different levels to unlock attributes, additional attributes on mods require different tiers of the weapon to unlock. If we click on the mod, we'll be able to see the rest of the mods I have available for this weapon. If we hover over a legendary one, we can see that it has 4 additional attributes. Epic has 3, Rare has 2, and Uncommon has 1. But as I stated before, the weapon must be of that exact tier for that attribute to be active. Going back to the core effect now, this is going to be how you decide what mod to put on what piece of gear. If we go over to this spreading marks mod, you'll see that when a marked enemy is defeated, the bullseye will spread to one enemy within 15 meters. This is an incredibly useful mod for shrapnel builds, and goes great on the crossbow. After hitting an enemy in a weak spot, they'll start to glow blue. This makes it so that you do more critical damage against enemies, and after killing the enemy that's glowing blue, the effect will actually jump to another enemy within a 15 meter radius. This makes tearing through large groups of enemies incredibly easy, but this is just one example of why the mod that you pick for your gear is super important. As I recommended at the end of my last video, it's super important that you go out and do some research and figure out what kind of build works for you so that you know how to utilize your mod slots properly. Okay, so now that you have a mod that works for you, that you really want to use with your build, you might be a little bit disappointed because you're looking at it and the attributes suck. But never fear, because I'm going to show you how to increase those attributes. If you right click on a mod, it'll bring up this little menu here. Notice down the bottom here how it has an energy link cost, a weapon mod parts cost, and a hold to enhance button. As you read up here, mod enhancements will upgrade one random attribute rarity. That means that if I had enough materials to enhance this mod, I could hold F and one of these random attributes would change to a different color. For example, the magazine capacity might go from green 4.8 to a purple 7.5. The aim is to enhance a mod as much as you can to try and get the best additional attributes. But pay attention to this little number down here because you can only actually enhance a mod a certain amount of times. On legendary mods you can enhance up to 5 times, on epic mods you can enhance 4, and this number continues to go down as the rarity does. So let's just say that you've enhanced this mod 5 times and you're not happy with it. You were aiming for all gold and purple attributes and you still only ended up with green and blue. Well, unfortunately this means there's only one last thing that you can do with this mod. That's right, it's time for the grinder. But that's okay because it's not completely wasted. If we go over and we select a couple mods here, you'll see that in the output section we have armor and weapon mod parts. I failed to mention this earlier, but when enhancing a mod, you need to use mod parts for that specific gear, whether that be weapons or armor. Armor mod parts are obviously used to enhance armor mods, and by that logic, weapon mod parts would be used to enhance weapon mods. The higher the rarity of the mod means the more weapon and armor mod parts that you'll receive. Now, if I have to talk about mods any longer, I'm going to start banging my head against a wall. If you guys thought that you were confused, you should see the look on my face. But before we jump into ammo types, I forgot to mention something at the start of the video which can make quite a bit of a difference to your gear, in particular weapons, and that is weapon attachments. So in order to change attachments on a weapon, you right click the weapon, same as the way that you access the mod menu, and you go to accessory. We have a barrel attachment, an optic attachment, a grip attachment, and a magazine attachment. If we click on one of these, we'll be able to see all the different available ones down here, and if you hover over them, you'll actually be able to see what stats they change. When utilized properly, weapon attachments can actually be super useful. If we come outside, I've removed all the attachments off this gun. Here I'll fire it without attachments, and then I'll put them back on, and I'll show you the difference. Pretty noticeable difference, right? Heading back to the attachment screen quickly, I'll go over each of these on the right hand side in case you're not a shooter game veteran. Stability controls the recoil of the gun, so having a high stability essentially stops the gun from jumping left, right, up and down when you're firing it. Accuracy improves the spread of bullets when firing, especially at longer ranges. So if you have low accuracy and you shoot at someone, you might only hit 5 out of 10 shots, but if you have higher accuracy, you might hit 8 or 9 of those shots. Range obviously impacts the distance at which you can hit enemies from, and reload speed, well, that determines how quickly you can reload a magazine. Pretty self-explanatory on that one. Attachments in one's human can be obtained through looting boxes or fighting bosses, or they can be purchased from a lot of vendors around the map. And now that we've covered that, it's time to move on to the final topic. While we're on the accessory/attachment screen, you'll see down the bottom here that you can select your ammo type. It's really important that if you do want to change the type of ammo you're using, that you come in here and you physically change it. But keep in mind, when you run out of the ammo that you're using, it will actually swap to the next ammo available in your inventory. I personally made it through about 95% of the main storyline and a ton of side quests without ever needing to swap ammo. I've only done it as of recently because I was planning on making this video. In order to craft better ammo types, you'll need to come to the Memetic Cradle and go to the crafting tab. Starting here, you can scroll down and you'll see that there are multiple different types of ammunition that can be crafted. Once you've unlocked the Memetic, you come to your supplies workbench where if you go over to the ammo here, you can go through and you can see all the ones available. For the sake of the video and because I'm such a nice guy, I've actually gone and crafted one of every type of ammo available in the game. On the screen now, you'll be able to see the name of each ammo, along with their damage per second, their overall damage out of a 33 bullet magazine, and their crafting recipes. It's important to keep in mind that just because I'm getting these damage outputs from these bullets doesn't necessarily mean that you will. I could potentially be at a different game stage with different gear to what you have, and I could have a completely different build to what you're running. So it's important you keep note of that when choosing which ammo to use. Now that that's all out of the way, it's time for me to tell you some of my personal tips. My first tip is in relation to workbenches and the materials required to craft better ones, and the materials required to craft better gear. This is definitely more of an option, but just because you can go into the super hard regions at the start of the game if you have better gear, doesn't necessarily mean you should. I wouldn't want you guys to rush through the game and miss out on all the fantastic things it has to offer, because Once Human is such a beautiful game, and I feel like you'd be ruining your experience if you rush straight for that end tier gear. But if that's the kind of person you are, go for it. Also in relation to workbenches, what you might not know is that every tier above the last one is actually able to craft everything that you were before. This doesn't just go for the gear workbench, this works for the supplies workbench as well. So if you have a level 2 or a level 3 unlocked, you can remove the ones before that. Tip number 3 is in relation to calibrations and attributes. Now I know in the early and mid game it might seem tempting to calibrate your low tier weapons and armor, but I can assure you it's a big waste of resources. It's really not needed, and at the rate you progress through the early stages of the game, you're going to be changing gear every 5 minutes. At most, I would recommend calibrating maybe 2 or 3, maybe even 4 times if you have only just entered that region. Otherwise, save all your materials until you get tier 5 gear, because you're going to be replacing this much less frequently. Same with re-rolling the attributes, it's really not worth spending 500 Stardust that early on in the game. You're better off waiting until you have a legendary calibration blueprint and using it on your tier 5 gear. Of course, you can always disassemble gear that you've put calibration levels into, but keep in mind you'll only get a fraction of the materials you initially used in return. Tip number 4 is exactly the same as the last one, but in reference to mods. Much like calibrations, there is no point investing materials or energy links into enhancing mods early in the game. Chances are you're not going to have any epic or legendary mods worth investing into, and even if you do, your gear's probably not a high enough tier to actually utilize it, so save it for the end game. And finally, tip number 5. Now, I was originally going to tell you not to worry about upgrading to steel ammo because it wasn't worth it, but while editing the video and collecting the stats for the ammo types, I've actually realized that there's quite a substantial difference between copper and steel ammo. However, unless absolutely necessary, I probably wouldn't go past steel. Later in the game, with multiple Digby boys working for you, you can collect an absolutely ridiculous amount of iron. So making steel to get steel ammo is not really an issue. But the difference between steel and tungsten ammo is quite minimal, so unless you're really struggling with a boss or a region of the map, I wouldn't recommend wasting your materials on that. So after all that, I hope that your brain is still intact, because I know that mine isn't. I really hope that you guys learned something from today, and as usual, if you have any questions or I said anything wrong, please feel free to drop a comment below, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and most importantly, have a fantastic rest of your day.